Welcome back to Between the Levees. I'm joined today by Mr. Jeff Stevens. He's been in the industry 45 years now. He's in his second failed retirement job for about 9 months. He is the equipment and sales manager for Heartland Barge. Mr. Stevens, thank you for joining me this evening.
Oh, thanks a lot. And in addition, I've had a few people call me and say, "Hey, there's this great podcast being done by Tim, and that you should try to get on there." So this worked out fantastic.
How did you first hear about the show?
A few of my friends had seen it and told me about it, and so I Googled it and found it, watched some of the videos, and then last week I actually found the one with Del Wilkins, which is interesting because I've had some extensive work history with Dell that we'll also talk about in this podcast. So yeah, it's you're getting pretty popular.
Well, I hope that continues, sir. Again, I thank you for joining me here. Let's begin where it all begins. Where were you born, sir?
So I was born in Sikeston, Missouri. Um, my father at the time was I think he had just wanted to escape the farm life. His family, he's a large family. They had a farm in the Boot Hill of Missouri. Average kind of farm, nothing spectacular. And my mother, her family was also down there, extremely poor, basically sharecroppers. So we were living in Sikeston. I was a very young age, maybe 3 years old. We moved to Alton, Illinois. And then just there for a short stint. And then that's when my father, who had in that transition, he had actually found a job with Gulf Inland and went out and was a deckhand and was a tankerman. So he was working with Gulf Inland during those years. That would have been in the early 60s. And finally got a pilot job and started working for Economy Boat Store in Wood River, Illinois. And then so we ended up moving to a little town called Meadowbrook out by a town called Bethalto. And that's where I finished my high school career, graduated from Bethalto High School.
Any good stories from childhood come to mind? Anything interesting getting into up there in that part of the world?
Well, I mean, I remember when I was probably 10, every summer we'd have to go back and help my mother's side of the family, pretty poor sharecropper. So I chopped a lot of cotton as a kid, old beans, bale hay. We did a lot of that, and then a lot of farm time with my grandfather. That's where we learned to hunt and fish. And so it was really good. I mean, some hard work in there, but you didn't know any better back in those days. So it was just good times, all positive memories. And I ended up loving basketball and had a really nice basketball career. I ended up going to college, Eureka College, where Ronald Reagan went, a little small school up near Peoria. And so yeah, it was all really good. I had three sisters; they were all fun, and yeah, it was all really positive experience around there.
Well, what did you study in college and how did you find your way to the industry?
Well, so we in college, uh, I made it through my freshman year, and then during that summer between freshman to sophomore, I stayed to work and help with all the basketball camps. My father decided to start his own business. So him and a guy named Homer Darrell Stevens is my father. He partnered with a guy named Art Heinricher. They started a little fleet service in Granite City Harbor called Art's Fleeting Service. Very small operation. And so he asked me to come and help. And so I did a little bit of my sophomore year, and then I quit. So I didn't finish college. Went and helped. And that later, we'll talk about it, but later that sold out and to Lewis and Clark Marine, and then eventually SEF bought that. And that'll be part of that transition that's going on right now with Ingram Mine out of SEF. But so that's kind of how I started. Prior to that, though, when my father was with Economy Boat Store, when I was a lot younger, I'd go out there on the boats with him, and he had me out there doing stuff, and when we were really young, and when you could do those sort of things. So I probably started getting on boats when I was, I guess, probably 13 or 14. So kind of got to know the industry a little bit as a young kid.
Well, tell me about your first time getting out there or your time out there on the boats as a teenager.
Um, as you mean like right out of college?
I thought you said at 13 or 14, your dad had you out
Oh, in
there.
those days, yeah, well, yeah. Well, in those days, it was, of course, everything was big and and strange, and so I remember being able to get in the pilot house and act like I was steering a little bit, and of course, it was an economy boat store, so you couldn't do a whole lot. And then, and actually later, I think he did a little bit of work with another company that's now gone. The Norman Brothers was the name of that company. I don't think they're in business anymore. So they wouldn't let you do much, but you could get out there with a life jacket on and walk around and try to lift a ratchet or something, and it was. But I always enjoyed getting in the engine room. Really, that's where I really like getting around there and watching them do stuff down in there. So it was good, safe times, but a great education.
Were you mechanically inclined or just enjoyed watching the engineers do their thing?
I was kind of mechanically inclined. I didn't really know it until later when that dad asked me to come to go to work for him. Of course, the first things we did was you know barge cleaning, broom and a bucket and a shovel, and we did some of those sort of things, and then learned to weld, learned to run crane, do repairs and those sort of things, and then he sent me off to a little place in St. Louis called Bailey Technical College. Went there and learned over a couple of years, learned AC and electronics, and then we took some classes on Caterpillars, and so that's when I really knew that I was mechanic inclined. And then we had a small repair back in those days. You had to have a lot of barge pumps, probably more than you need now. And then so I ran their small engine repair shop. So that's when I kind of felt really good about it. I mean, I was good at. I did well at everything, running a crane and welding and mechanical side of it. It was all just seemed easy. Hard work, but easy to learn.
Well, let's start walking into and through your career. So you get out of college, I believe you said you went to work with family.
Yes, went to work for my father, Homer Darrell Stevens, in that little fleet there in Granite City, Arts Fleeting Service. And so I worked there for a while, and then eventually, after I went through all the things I was just telling you about, eventually he started letting me work in the pilot house a little bit, and I got steered, and then eventually I got my pilot license. And so the first boat they had, and the first boat I ran was a little boat called the Barry Dean, one engine, one main engine, one generator, old D 398, and it was like 60 foot long and 21 feet wide, and you turned it too hard, light boat, and it felt like you were going to fall over. But it was a workhorse. We'd take 4 loads down through St. Louis Harbor with that little boat and bring 6 or 8 empties up. It was amazing how much you could get done with a little 400 horsepower boat. So did that for a while. Then they grew, got another boat, and I can even back up a little bit that some of that early time in the business in Wood River with Sioux City, New Orleans, they had a ship tied up in Hartford there, and it was called the Mr. Cole. Some of the old guys that listen to this don't know what I'm talking about. A little funky old kind of an offshore vessel sitting there, and that what they used it for office space. So I dispatched as well. So just got a little bit of feel for everything in the business, and then he grew, got the 48s. We ran more, and then eventually got a boat, an 1800 called the Senator Sam, which was a great vessel, and they did really well for quite a while. They grew enough that they ended up getting bought out. They somebody made them a nice offer, and they bought them out, and so that's when things kind of changed, and it was so I went to work for Sioux City, New Orleans at that time. And I'll give a shout out to Jim Fox, who was over at Sioux City. A lot of people in the industry know Jim Fox. He's probably another great one for you to talk to. But Jim at that time was running the logistics at Sioux City, New Orleans, and he was a family friend. We grew up in church and knew him from when I was young, and he's got a brother, John Fox, that was with ACBL for a long. I think they got a boat named John Fox at ACBL, and we were all good friends. And so I transitioned over to Sioux City there I guess, early 80s.
I have John Fox tentatively booked already. I don't know that I've heard of Jim Fox. Tell me about him.
Well, Jim would be a good one to talk to as well. He's got some history down here in Harahan with ACBL, and then he actually, when Del Wilkins and I was in Argentina, Jim was in Venezuela.
I don't want to skip ahead too much in your career. Is Argentina a fair leap from where we left off?
Yes.
Then let's back up a little bit, sir. Tell me what happened with Sioux City, New Orleans.
So with Sioux City, and I was a pilot at the time, and they had just got their first brand new 1,200 horsepower boat, brand spanking new, pride of the fleet, and then they put me on it. And then Jim asked me, he goes, "How many loads can you take?" And I said, "I take 9 with that. I take 4 on a 400 horsepower. I think I can take a lot more of that." So first day on the job, I took 9 down, and by the time I turned around and came back up and made crew change, and the old captain that was been there forever, come on board, and I got one of the biggest butt chewings I've ever had in my life, because they only wanted to take 6, and I didn't know that. So that was my introduction to there. So, but it went really well. We did great, and great boat. We'd run the Missouri River a little bit up on the Missouri, and then later on with that boat, we ended up we'd take 16 empties up to Pekin, 15 empties in a hip barge on that little 1,200 horsepower boat. And we'd bring out, 9 loads, it was pretty steady. In today's world, I don't think the guys would be doing that. It's from what I'm hearing, they're I don't know if the Coast Guard's limiting them, but I hear they're very limited on what you can do with a 1,200 horsepower nowadays. But Sioux City was a great time. I really enjoyed it. And then we also worked we worked a lot in St. Louis Harbor as well. And it was it was a great experience. It was exciting. We were all young. Wasn't that many regulations. You could downstream when you wanted. You could do just about anything you wanted to do. And those were really fun days. I had a blast doing all that. And then at one point, I kept seeing this big shiny aluminum vessel, stainless steel vessel on the St. Louis City front called the Admiral, and it was a huge boat, and I decided I wanted to run that boat. So I went to Memphis and upgraded my license on my own. I was out at the river school, and while at the river school, I ran into one of my dad's old relief captains, a guy by the name of Huey. And I could hear him in the other room laughing. I knew it was him just by his laugh. And I went and talked to him. And he's like, "Jeff," he goes, "you ought to come down to my boat tonight and have dinner with us." And I said, "Okay." So I'm in Memphis downtown. So I went down the riverfront, and there was no towboat down there, but there was this big giant casino boat down there. So it was 220 feet long and like 65 feet wide and about 44 feet high. And it looked like a mega yacht. Beautiful. So I went down there and said, "You guys ever heard of a guy named Hooley Bowermeister?" And they're like, "Yes, sir. We know Hooley." So sure enough, that's the boat he was on. And he was doing the maiden voyage delivery from Morgan City, Louisiana to Joliet, Illinois. It was a Harris Casino boat. And so Harris Casino they were starting their first ever business up there. So I said, "Okay," and we exchanged the name. And he was like, "We got a bunch of maritime guys from the Maritime Academy in the pilot house, and they're hitting everything. And we need towboaters that can handle boats, So I thought about we separated ways, and I went back to work, and I was really enjoying what I was doing, because we were, as a fleet boat there, like in low water in the Missouri River, Dan C towing. These guys around the river, the mouth of the river would close up sometimes, and we'd have to do some pretty dangerous stuff to get them in and out of that river. They would actually have to top around sometimes, and they'd be hard to describe. But anyway, there was some pretty treacherous things we'd have to do to get them in and out of there. We had a blizzard of, I guess it was 82, I think it was. There was a big blizzard, and the ice gorge formed at the mouth of the Missouri River coming down to the head of Chain Ross Canal, and ACBL had several 5600s light boat just down there trying to cut through the ice to allow traffic to get in and out of the head of that canal. And like I went in one day, they asked me to come in one day. I ran a little boat. The name of the boat was Redneck, and a little 900 horsepower boat. And I was just supposed to deliver another boat down to St. Louis from Wood River. I got out of the river and I'm getting my turn, and I'm sitting out there watching this giant ice gorge with binoculars, and I started telling them, guys, I think it's breaking loose. And they were kind of listening, but not, big heavy tow pilots talking to the fleet guys sometimes wasn't all that respectful, right? So, and it was breaking loose. And I said, guys, I said, you better get out there. And they did, and it broke loose. And by the time it came over, it took one of those 5600s and put it right up on the shore, on that left descending shore. Just it was incredible watching that stuff. So, getting to watch those sort of things and navigate. I just really love navigating. Was one of my passions. So all those times with Sioux City was that was just wonderful times. And the other thing was I really enjoyed helping people learn how to run boats. So I was always training somebody to run a boat, and I trained quite a few pilots, and later became big tow pilots or worked in the fleets and as dispatchers and managers. And so it was another part of my career that I really appreciate is besides my family and my ability to learn Spanish, and then was the people I've helped through the way all these years, and watching them grow and do great things. So that's been a big part of my time out of the river, and that's just up to that point. So yeah, so then I guess maybe I don't know 3 or 4 months later, Hooli Bowermaster called me again. He's like, "You sure you don't want to come to work up here?" And so I went up and did an interview. And the interview it's another pretty crazy story. So I get up to Joliet. For those that know Joliet, just above Brandon Rose Lock, there used to be a little bar on the right descending shore, and the boat was tied up there. And so I go down and meet the boss. It was Brent Willits, great guy. And he's like, "Jeff, look, it's easy. Take this thing out. Show me you can get it out in the river, turn it around a few times, land it. Don't knock anybody off a bar stool, and your job's yours." Kind of deal, And getting up on a ship like that and to run it is pretty crazy since you've been on a push boat. The pilot house was 52 feet wide with a solid wall behind you, so you couldn't look out the back. And then to dock and undock, you go out on a wing station, transfer your navigation and throttles out. And so I'm up there with my wife, and she was in shock just how big this thing was. And so we take it out in the river, and we're kind of doing a few things. And the wind was blowing pretty good, and where he says, "Okay, we're done," and so we're going in. And then the general manager steps up and he goes, "Hey, we just got our first." Now remember, this is in '92. So he says, "We just got our first link from the where they're going to moor these things, which is halfway up between the bridges between Jefferson and Cass. We need to do a test run. Can we take it up through the bridges?" And of course, Brent says, "Oh yeah, we can." And then the general manager, he steps out, and Brent's like, "You can take it through the bridges, right, Jeff?" And this thing's massive. It's 220. By the way, when you get up in there, the width of the concrete walls up in there is only 150 foot, and you're on a 225-foot long vessel going through these bridges. And these are the bridges that lift up. They lift like this or like this, and so it makes it a lot narrower. And I go, "Well, you've been up through these bridges, right?" He's like, "No, we haven't." I said, "Well, you verified you can clear the bridge, right?" Because most everybody at that time had a plaque on their hip of the pilot house said, check the clearance on that bridge. He goes, "Well, we kind of have." So then I'm like, "Okay, get the engineer up here. How much fuel you got on board? What's our draft?" And going through the whole checklist, and then I got the deckhands up there and put deckhands all around it, and I said, "Hell, let's go." I always love a good challenge, and at that time I was at the peak of my navigational skills, and I wasn't afraid of very much. So we start going up through these bridges and talking to the bridge operators. Let's get that bridge up. Okay, yeah, boy, they would, man. The bridges would just come up beautifully. We're going through a nice, pretty good breeze on the side, and the people are coming down off one side, waving, and we're blowing the horn. It was just a beautiful thing, right? And so my plan was to go through all the bridges where you got a little space, turn around, and come back. And then as soon as we got up right by where Harris had they had built a slip for two vessels to fit in there. Actually, we got right there. Well, those bridges are only 900 foot apart. The general manager comes up and he goes, "Okay, we're done testing. Let's go back." And Brent's like, "Oh," he goes, "Let's turn around." I go, "No, we're not turning around. We're going all the way up." And then we had a little bit of discussion, and then I kind of stopped. And so I called the bridge behind me and I said, "Hey, listen, we got to turn around. Can you keep the bridge up?" Now, this is right in the middle of the city, a lot of traffic. We'll keep it around. We'll keep it open for you. And this thing had a bow thruster. It was twin screwed. It handled it was just handled so good. So put deck hands on each side. I start spinning it around, and I come around, and the bridge is going down. And so now I'm in panic mode because I wasn't sure how this thing would back up and hold its stern and all that sort of stuff. And there was an ambulance coming, so they had to lower the bridge. So everybody in the pilot house is just all in shock. I mean, everybody. I'm looking around at everybody, and everybody's just their mouths open, and it was a pretty impressive sight. So we got through it. We landed it, and he's like, "Okay, when can you start?" So let me think about it. Went home, talked to my father, who was a executive in the maritime business, and he's like, "Don't do that because the casinos aren't going to last. Whatever you do, don't do that." And so I went back out on the boats, and sure enough, my next trip was right up there. Was 15 loads right through Joliet, and we turn around, and I'm sitting waiting on and by that time they had actually started putting the boat in the dock. So now I'm back down to the same place where I had taken the interview at Brandon Road there, just above. I'm tied off, feet kicked up, reading the book, and I see something out of my corner of my eye, and I look, and there's this big boat right next to me, literally 10 feet off of me, and I walk outside, and there's Hooley Barmaster, the guy standing outside right there with two of the prettiest cocktail waitresses you ever seen, going, "Hey, Jeff, when are you going to come work for us?" And I'm not saying that convinced me, but it did help. And so sure enough, I called him back up and went to work for him.
Before we dive too far into that, tell me if anything comes to mind from your days with a pilot trainee in the wheelhouse. Anything interesting, maybe emergencies you helped avert, things like that?
Well, I got a couple of really good stories, a couple of bad stories. Um, you know, the first thing we would do is I would actually put a piece of tape on the throttle and at half speed back and forward, and I wouldn't let them go past half throttle. I made them run a boat slow and easy. If they went past if they go past 50%, I'd put them back on the deck because in those days, you really wanted to take care of your equipment and you want to learn how to run things smooth. And so we have a couple of instances out there. I give a shout out to my old buddy Kenny Maxhiner, who's ended up coming to work for me up there at Harris Casino, and he's done a great job in the casino industry. He's actually now the senior VP, I think, out at the LaBerge out in Lake Charles at the LaBerge Casino out there. But he was the first one I tried that with because he came from New Orleans and they were wild. They were just hard down, full throttle back and forth. So that was the main thing: teach them to learn how to run it slow and easy. And then we would, we'd just work up on them. We headlined most of the time. I think you know what that is, right? Headlining.
I do, but some of the audience might not.
Yeah, so it's basically it's a mooring rope from your center cables, and it's a double line goes out and back to the boat, and it wraps around the tonies a little bit on each side so that you can maneuver. And you don't put your wires on it. You just use the rope and at the half cable, and so we would do that most time. It was just a lot easier on your crew as well. Then we'd start testing them off in that, and then we'd work them up to then we'd practice downstream and out in the middle of the river. get out alongside of a barge, practice downstream, and try to get them to where they could hold it. When we were up in Mobile Island Fleet with the Sioux City, I'd take them up on the Missouri River when they got good, and I'd make them downstream on a buoy on the Missouri River and see if they could hold it. They're on, 5-10 feet off of a buoy, just hold that position. And if they could do that, they're good on downstream. You can downstream on the Missouri River, you're good anywhere. But I did, we did have a vessel sink right next to us once. So we're in the fleet, and it was a pilot that had came in. I tested him, and I told him that he's not ready, and so they wouldn't let him go to be a pilot, and he quit, and he went to work for another company. I won't say who it was, and so we're in there one evening, and that guy came in, and we needed him to downstream on a dangerous fleet, and I knew it was him. And I said, listen, let's just slide a couple strings down. It takes a little extra, but it's safe. And he had a few choice words for me because I was the one that wouldn't let him come to work for us. And it was ugly. And so he was going to do it anyway. So I was already downstream in about 5 widths in on loaded barges. He came in. He needed to get in on 3 widths in. So he came in and he missed pretty bad the first time, but he got out of there early enough that he didn't damage anything. And then I said, look, we're going to just move it. And he raised hell, but I wanted to move everything down. He wouldn't do it. And then, so he came in and tried it again, and he landed, but he was landed crooked, and the current had a stern. And so he was at probably about a 30-degree angle or so. And he wasn't able to bring that stern back up straight into the water into a safe position. And he was full ahead. And I told him, I said, listen, you hit the general alarm, man, get everybody up, because it was a small fleet boat, live-on boat. And he did. And one of my best friends was on that boat, and I didn't know it. And so Greg came up, and I saw Greg, and he looked around, and he basically grabbed this guy and threw him out of the way, got on the radio, and he goes, Jeff, we're in trouble, right? And I said, yeah, Greg, I know. I was trying to slide my boat over enough to catch his stern, so it wouldn't go under, and I couldn't get there. And so Greg said, look, he goes, I'm just going to go full ahead, full rudder, try to skim right across the face of this fleet, and just go. And so I said, go for it, brother. So I backed out, and I was getting out in the river, and he turned, and he started going. And of course, he's up against the loads completely with water pressure, on his hull, tilting him. And he's scraping across those 3 widths. And the bow of the boat cleared, but his starboard stern timber head caught the last underslung Tony of that outside barge. And he just went out and went, foom, and he just flipped right over and sunk right there. 30 seconds, they're down. And of course, back in those days, nobody had their doors open and so luckily I think there was 2 deckhands on the barge. We got Greg out of the water, and then a couple of them didn't make it, including that pilot. So that was one of the worst things I saw.
Indeed. What do you see, obviously over a 50-year career, nearly 50-year career, changes in the industry that have been positive from when you started to now?
I think the care of the employees, is really much better. And when I say care, I think people always cared. It's just risk assessments and understanding hazards and putting in processes in place. And something I'll talk about later. I ended up being a compliance guy for J. Ray McDermott in Blue Water, and we had ISM, International Safety Management, for the vessels, which now has come into the rivers and is called Subchapter M. So I was doing that prior to all that. So I think that I think the whole Subchapter M thing is better for the industry. It's more expensive. It's a little bit more of a pain because of the paperwork, but that slow change to that and everything entitled in it. I mean, I was a designated examiner for Canal Barge at one point. But I think it has grown in the right direction. I know there's a lot of people still has not accepted it. I talked to a lot of people now. I talked to pilots and captains and office manager and executives even now, and most of everyone has accepted it and understands it. But there's a little bit of a group out there that still has it. But I would say overall that the verification of competency, the intent, the because people still paperwork, they paper whip things, but the redundancies in your equipment and your verification of your uh, knowledge and your skills is I think is some of the best thing that's happened, and which doesn't really jive in my head because I now see where people won't take more than 4 barges with a 2,000 horsepower boat, and I just don't understand that. Because it's you can do that with a 1,600, right? And I do believe in the U.S. Coast Guard's regulations for horsepower requirements at bridges when in different areas during extreme conditions, but on just regular days, it just seems like we've went a little bit backwards on what the wheelman, what the real potential is to do it safely.
I've heard that too. When did you see that change? Where previously with a 6 or 800, you could move 15 loads and stuff like that. Now I don't think an 800 would move more than two.
Well, when I came back from the Blue Water, that's kind of when I saw it. So when I left Blue Water industry, which was probably around 2003, and I came back around 2008, somewhere in there. That's when I kind of noticed it. That's when I started seeing that.
Well, we left your career. I think you had just accepted a job to be a casino boat pilot.
Yep. So Harris Casino. So yeah, I was a pilot there, and they had a nice size slip built for 2 vessels. At the time we got there, there was only one vessel. They were having trouble with ABS and with the Coast Guard because the maritime main guys, the pilots, or the captains of maritime main, not the engineers, they had already they were already beating this boat up, and it was having enough damage that the Coast Guard and the ABS guys were getting concerned. And so when I took over as a pilot. They were doing some things I just couldn't believe. Some of the things they were doing from a navigational perspective made no sense. And so I got with my boss there and said, "Hey, listen, this doesn't make sense." And he was a towboater. He's like, "Yes, that's exactly what we want to change." Every time he would say yes. So I started teaching him how to run the boat different, and which turned out to be a lot safer at the end of the day because you had to move every 2 hours, and so that was a great experience. And then I kept seeing that there was no plan. Like if you get down through the 3 bridges that are retractable lifting bridges, you get down below there and there's a power outage or whatever, and those bridges can't move. You're trapped with up to 1,200 people on board, and you can't go back. And nobody will listen. So I got with a security manager there, and he and I worked out a plan. We drew up some stuff. We'd go down on regular cruises, and I'd sneak over and tie up. Nobody would even know it. We do measurements, and we built a really nice ramp. Got red carpet. Had charter buses on standby. Marketing team on standby with champagne. All the good stuff. And then we had a nice plan. We practiced a few times. It worked good. So sure enough, one day, now this is years later. Um, uh, I was selected to go down to Morgan City to deliver our second boat, which was a real paddle wheeler, true paddle wheeler with a little 400 horsepower bow thruster. And so that was actually, there was Hurricane Opal back in those days. I don't know if you remember Hurricane Opal. You're from down here, but it was a long time ago. And it came, and that's the first time I ever heard about a hurricane. And we're like, we don't care about a hurricane. We're taking it out. And they're like, no, you're not. And thank goodness we listened to them. But we took it down through Venice Jump and brought it from Venice all the way up to Joliet. I think we stopped in Vicksburg, backed up into the river there, the Yazoo, to fuel and take supplies, and we made it all the way up in like 11 days. It was a really cool trip. First time I ever dealt with ship pilots down here, because when I came out in Venice and jumped into the river, these numbers were calling me, and I didn't know what a number was, and it was pretty interesting. And but anyway, once we had that boat, it had fake stacks, like the old smokestacks. So the deal was, when you're moored, you had to have the stacks up so it looks pretty to the public. But whenever you back out, part of your pre-sale checklist, we actually were doing pre-sale checklists then. I put those in place. One of the captains forgot to lower the stacks, and so he goes through the Jefferson Bridge, and he hits the power cables. And so didn't break the power cables, but it broke the supports. So now the supports are hanging so low you can't get through. And so there we are in this exact situation we talked about. And I just happened to be coming in, and at that time with two boats, we had a process where one boat would back out, and the other boat would dive in, and then the boat that had backed out, he would take off. That way we would only have one lift on the city bridge. They'd raise up one time. One would back out of the slip with guests. The other one would go into the slip, and then you would shoot down through the bridge. And so I had just came in with mine, which was the mega yacht, and somebody yells they hit the bridge. So I go out and look, and they didn't hit the bridge, but I saw the power cable down. And so 2 seconds later, after I docked, the general manager comes up. He's like, Jeff, what are we doing? What's going on? I told him. He goes, do we have a plan? I said, yeah, we do. Called the security manager. I called the boat. They went down, docked at the right spot. We went down. The ramp was sitting there waiting on them. The red carpet was in the bar. So we rolled out the red carpet. The charter buses showed up, champagne. Everybody got off, and it was slick. It was a great thing, and it was really a very positive event. And so 2 days later, I got promoted to office manager. That's how I started my first job in the office. It was because we pre-planned that emergency response. And so so that's kind of that whole thing there. And then shortly, not too long after I took that job in the office, of course, they sent me off to Vegas for casino management training and a lot of other stuff that big companies do. But it wasn't long after that is when I started my employment with ACBL.
What did you do first for them?
So with ACBL, Harris Casino, part of being a manager, they expected that you do community service. So, and they said, here, you got $25,000. And so now this is like a 94 or something, $25,000. That was a lot of money. So I got and by that time I'd already weeded out all the Maritime Academy pilots, and either moved them to mates or we moved them out. And so I had guys from the rivers, towboaters, and they're running that thing. And so we said, well, let's do a video and on safe navigation around this thing and around 15 barge tows coming down through these bridges. Because it was always a hassle, these yacht people coming out and getting in your way, sailboats or whatever. So we made a nice video, and then we started going around to yacht clubs in the Chicago area, Joliet area, and giving training to the public with this video. Well, the Illinois River Carriers Association heard about it somehow, some way, and I received a letter demanding that I come to the next meeting and explain on what we're doing as far as training in the Illinois River. And so I did. I showed up at the next one, and so I went in there and introduced myself. It was a good meeting. Thank goodness I was a towboater, ex-towboater. It might not have went so good. They appreciated that. So I gave the presentation, showed the video, and took some questions, and all went good. And then on our break, a gentleman by the name of Jim Farley came and said, "Hey, we got this thing going on in Venezuela. Would you be interested in working out of the country?" And I said, "Yes, well, I might, so let me." He told me a little bit about it, and it sounded exciting. And now I had 3 children by that time, 3 boys, which are now all doing extremely well. I should have talked about them a little bit at the beginning. One of them actually he's a captain on a 7200 for ACBL. But all 3 of them are doing really well.
Are they all in the industry?
One is a captain. And my oldest son Chris, he did his time in the Air Force, graduated or retired E9. He was actually, I think he was like, some of the stuff he couldn't talk about. It was top secret stuff in the IT world, and like I think he was managing 5-star General laptops or something. He couldn't talk about it a whole lot, and then so when he retired, the company that he was managing, General Dynamics, they hired him in as a high level guy. So he's doing extremely well. And then my middle son is the captain. He's been, I think he's closing in on 18 years with ACBL. And then my youngest son, he's a retirement wealth planner, doing very well. And yeah, and I've got a daughter. I'll share you a little bit about my daughter here in a little bit. That's a little future story.
Well, I did jump in the middle here. You were telling your story. I think this is the first job with ACBL.
Yep. So yeah, so I took the job. Lou Meese, who's now passed, a great individual. He was a guy that I worked with to get through all that, and Oscar Kurth, who was the the head of the South American operations for ACBL. God bless him as well. He's since passed. Great guy. And so I went to Venezuela, got my first passport, first international trip. Didn't speak any Spanish, Went to Venezuela, flew into Caracas, and went over to Puerto Ordaz on the Orinoco River, where they were already operating. And Del Wilkins was in the process of leaving, going to Argentina. And so I went there to look at that position and reviewed it. And I was honest with him. I just didn't think I was ready for a general manager's position at that time, especially on the international basis. A lot of pressure on the finances side, and I just didn't have that experience. So I was honest with him, and he goes, "Well, we have a position in Argentina. Would you like to go there?" I'm like, "Let's talk." So they made a nice offer, and I took it. And so that's how I ended up down in Argentina. And so Argentina, I don't remember how many weeks later, but I went down there, flew down there, and for those that don't know, Houston flight to Buenos Aires is 10 hours. It's a long ways down there. So flew down there, went into Rosario, where the main operation was at. First day on the job, met Del Wilkins, and I actually met my future wife that day. Didn't know it at the time, but this is my future wife, and so he put me in a class, 2 weeks learning Spanish. It was just hardcore Spanish. Marcelo Priotti was the guy teaching me, great guy, and did 2 weeks there. Learned a little bit of Spanish, and kind of find out I had a little bit of a knack for it. And then we had our first delivery coming. It wasn't the first delivery for that location. It was the first delivery for me, these submersible ships. So it was 33 barges, 3 high, 11 wide on a submersible ship with the old dry dock out of St. Louis, at a dry dock in a boat. And they come down, and then we offloaded that equipment, which is quite intense because you basically, the first 2 layers, they have they install man covers in every wing tank on one side, and so you basically you sink. When we took those off, they'd sink the first level, and the top 2 levels would float off. So that's what we'd take off, and then they would raise the ship back up, tilt it to the port, tilt the whole ship, which would drain out those hatch covers, drain as much water out of them as they could, and then they would close them, secure them, and then unlatch it from the deck of the ship, and then sink again, and then we'd float one off, and then when you got that one layer of 11 barges, then you had to put 22 barges back on, which is pretty interesting because you got a ship on hanging on an anchor, so that so your ship is basically moving like this, and then you're trying to come in with your barges. You're faced up on the half cable on the side, so you've got 11 wide in front of you, and you're 200 feet wide, and so you got to kind of match that sway back and forth and catch lines. And so we're dealing with guys that speak mostly Dutch with our Hispanic crews, and a gentleman named Bill Kinsler, I'll give a shout out to. Bill Kinsler was there as well. He's a icon in the industry. So we started doing that. Got those offloaded, and that was kind of my first big job when I got to Argentina, was to get those and then get those up to, because they had already selected a base of operations for the future. And so we got all that equipment up to that base of operations, which at the time was nothing more than an 80-foot cliff. It was just straight up bluff, and got them in there, got them tied off and secured, and then and then we started digging our path down the side of that hill into there. And I guess something kind of funny was, I started having to hire shipyard guys, and so Marcelo, my translator, he helped me hire these guys. And once we kind of got going, a little bit of a funny story was I couldn't remember their names always, and so out of my supervisor, who was Hispanic and didn't speak any English, I kept saying, "Hey, ¿cómo se llama? What's this guy's name?" Right? And he goes, "Cabezon." So I called this guy Cabezon for 2 or 3 weeks. Finally, he comes up to me. He's like, "Please, Jeff," in Spanish, I could tell he was saying, "Please don't call me that anymore." And so that night when I went back, I called Marcelo, my translator. I go, "What is Cabezon?" He said, "That's Waterhead." So I've been calling this guy Waterhead for 3 weeks. And so there's just a lot of good, funny stories about learning another language, especially around towboaters and shipyard guys, because everybody's messing with each other and having fun. So that was like kind of some of my first really getting going down in Argentina, working with Del Wilkins. And Del, by the way, at that time was speaking excellent Spanish.
Well, did you learn anything new or interesting from his episode?
Not really. I watched the whole episode. I've stayed in touch with Del. I've kept up with him. And while we were down there, he and I basically, we hung out together all the time. We rode Harleys together in Argentina. They imported Harleys down there. We rode them, and Del still rides. But no, I had, and then later I'm going to tell you a little bit my time in Colombia, where I hired Canal Barge, which was Del. I called Del. I needed help in another country, so I called Del, and we hired Canal Barge. So, and by that time, a lot of the things that he talked about, about his travels around the world, seeing, being in Africa and exploring other rivers and stuff. He and I talked about that many times. So really wasn't a lot of surprises for me, because I know Del very well and we've communicated a lot. So, but not a better guy to work for, I can tell you that.
Well, fill me in some more on the job as things develop down there in Argentina.
So, so started off, I was gonna handle the upper end. That river is, I think even Dell talked about it. It's from Vicksburg, about the same distance as Vicksburg to Minneapolis, and then not quite halfway, there's a turn, similar like the Ohio River. There's a turn that goes off. It's called the Alto Paraná, and that's a lot shorter, and it's the upper end's kind of in a rock canyon, so water levels fluctuate pretty significantly, and it's a pretty dangerous operation. So I was going to handle the upper end, and we had someone else down there who was going to handle the lower end. I kind of focused on getting the base of operations going, setting up the dry dock, which I had never operated a dry dock, but now I was in charge of it. wish we would have had FaceTime back in those days, because I could have really used a lot of help trying to explain things that were going on. But we safely got it up and running and doing well. I ran the dry dock mostly, and of course all the North American pilots, captains, and engineers we brought down quite a few great guys. There's a few of them that didn't last very long, but in general, they're fantastic guys. We had a requirement that you come down, you had to learn Spanish, right? Just another quick funny Spanish story. Gerald McDonough, God bless him, he passed not too long ago as well. But Gerald McDonough's from Alabama, had a heavy Alabama drawl. And the first time I met him, he knew I was on the boat, and I was sitting in the galley on one of our 5600s, and he walks in and he yells, "Buenos dias, y'all," in his best Alabama and Spanish. And that crew just, all Hispanics, all Argentines, they just died laughing. It was so funny. Uh, but but yeah, anyway. So yeah, we got going, got operating. We had some equipment that we operated that wasn't very good, and we were having a lot of trouble with them. In fact, we had one of them flip over on us. They do bauxite, really heavy, but those barges were V hopper, so the hopper's straight V. So they would have bauxite in the middle, and then bean oil in the wing tanks. No double skin. So we had a lot of trouble with those. And then we had a few accidents here and there. We brought down a little 1600 horsepower fleet boat as well. So we everything in general, everything went okay. We were, as Dell said, the trip times. If you imagine no lock and dams, and you'd leave from Vicksburg and go to Minneapolis, load out, come back. It's not that long, right? And down there it was taking a month and a half, and so a lot of my time was I traveled a lot. Paraguay, Paraguay, Brazil, and Bolivia, because the upper end was Bolivia and Brazil, and in the middle was Paraguay. So and just tremendous amount of beans and bean oil and the bauxite. So just really a lot of stuff. But the river was a meandering river. So there's areas that they were having a lot of trouble. So we got some better boats down there and some sounding gear. Started making our own buoys, and so basically the guys, when they knew where the bad areas were at, they would send the boats out, sound, drop their own buoys, pass through. But then you had to go back and pick them up because the locals would steal them. 3/8-inch cable was a high commodity down there. I mean, it was, so that part was really tough on the crew. But we had extra crew on board as well. We had a few mates that spoke Spanish, and then you got to have a few extra crew on there anyway. So they made it. It was tough, but we got the trip times down quite a bit. Did flip one barge over. Our North American pilots actually dove in the water, went underneath the barge, got a wire around them, and floated them back in tow upside down, brought them down a couple 100 kilometers to the base of operations. And then that reminds me of the Coast Guard. I mean, down there it's called Prefectura. So the Coast Guard was really tough, because we were the North American company, and they just didn't want to. We were doing things they weren't comfortable with. They're used to coming down with 10 barges, 12 barges, and we're coming down with 25. There's bridges where they say you can't go through a bridge at nighttime with more than 8 barges, and we're like, that's an easy 25 barge bridge. So we were really pushing the limits down there. So when that barge flipped over, we called the Coast Guard. They're like, yeah, we'll be up there in a few weeks. We got a 400-ton crane. We'll be up there in 3 or 4 weeks. And so we're like, okay. And so we hired divers, went in, cut holes in the bottom, pumped them all up, pumped the barge all out, got it all free of everything safely. Had them put cables on the barge. We got the barge out in the river and basically put a bridle on one side. The barge like crossways in the river, right? And we come off of each end, go across the hull of the bridle. Went up. We only had one boat that had a bit that was on the forward side of the rudders, so you could do that kind of towing. And we flipped that thing ourselves. Flipped it over, finished pumping it out, put it back in service, and 3 weeks later they showed up. They called and said, "Hey, we're going to come with a crane." We don't need that now. And so we did things like that. We really challenged it. We had a few problem areas, where North Americans wouldn't sometimes. The Argentines would say, "Hey, we got it. We can do this." And the Americans, "Okay, let's see you." So we'd have a little accident here and there. We did have one major bridge collision in that one bridge where I said you can only go through like I think it was 8 at night. I think it was. We're going through a 25 at night, and I got called to the basically the White House down there, La Casa Rosa. I got called there. I had to go there with a team of lawyers, and went down there and it was basically would be like the commandant of the Coast Guard. Went down there and they had an expert that was there telling us why we couldn't do that, and it was a pretty rough conversation. And then when it came to my turn, I asked him about his experience, and he was an offshore sea captain. Hardly ever done anything in the rivers, and never been through that bridge. And I just kind of asked him some targeted questions, and he couldn't answer any of them. And we said, "Well, we don't accept this. We're going to keep going." And so there was we pushed the limits. I mean, it was we got threatened several times, but we made it, and we were doing it safely. That was the thing, because Dell's level of integrity and mine were pretty high, and so we didn't want to be doing things that would ruin the reputation of ACBL or ourselves. So we were just doing things that we know for sure were safe to do, and it worked. And we turned that around. I mean, by the time we left, it was, I think it was 22, 24 days turnaround, where it had been a couple of months when we started. Pretty impressive. And then another good story down there, the Coast Guard, after that, they kind of got to know me, and then they decided they wanted to explore this Alto Paraná. And so they had a brand new boat, Coast Guard boat. And so I met them in a town called Corrientes. Basically, it would be like Cairo, let's say. And met them there, and we went up the Alto Paraná, and we were sounding it, just verifying, widths and depths to see what we could navigate with. And they had this beautiful radar on this thing, really nice. And so I'm like, "Well, turn the radar on. Let's just that way we can check our widths and blah blah blah." And they're like, "Well, it doesn't work. It's a brand spanking new Furuno." And I'm like, "Well, let me try." And it did work. They just didn't know how to work. They didn't know how to operate it. So they've been running this boat for a long time with a beautiful radar. So they taught them how to use their own radar, which is really cool. And then as we got up the river, we find that there's this place called Jacerita by a town. Ituzango is the name of the town. And you can look this up sometime if you're interested. But it's a at the time it was one of the world's largest hydro plants. It was a little lock and dam with a hydraulic generating dam, and it's still, even to this day, it's still they're not getting even close to maxing that thing out on what it can produce. Beautiful, but the lock and dam was built really strange. It was very strange, and so that was the only lock and dam we had up there. And then once you get above there, it pools up pretty big, and then eventually it gets up into a canyon, and it's like I say, it's really really rock and vertical sides. So it was kind of cool. I spent 4 days going up that river with those guys, doing all that. Found a little town up there called Puerto Rico, Argentina. Got off, and I said, and this is the middle of nowhere now. I mean, this is like, you're in the middle of nowhere. I said, they told me where the nearest airport was. I got a remise, a taxi, and I go there, and there's this place called Iguazu Falls. And that's someplace, if you haven't heard of or seen it, you definitely should look it up. Iguazu. It's a huge waterfall between Paraguay and Brazil. In fact, at the hotel I stayed at there that overlooks it, I think it was Truman. President Truman had been there, and in the guest book they displayed it. His wife had wrote in there, "Poor Niagara." It's not quite as tall as Niagara, but it's a lot wider. Just a spectacular place. Great, and that's in subtropical. And that's the other thing down there is, we were on the southern end, so navigating north. So and when you go north there, you're going up into a warmer climate. So the upper end for us, like Minneapolis, you have been in subtropical weather. You got jaguars and tarantulas and monkeys and all that sort of stuff on the upper end. So that was a really exciting thing. And then keeping these Americans from running man overboard drills in places they shouldn't run them just because they're see something pretty on the bank was a bit of a challenge for us. And on the very, very upper end, you're in Brazil and Bolivia. And so up there, that's where and that's where when I got free from the base of operation, getting it set up, and I took off. By the way, our other North American in the office helping me, he had left by then, so I had the whole thing by myself. Dell being the head of operations, I ran it on the operational side. But that's when I really got into showing these guys how to manage barges, redesigning how they're pulling barges and pulling tops. And they would literally have an open hopper spread open. They'd have a chute going right into the middle of the barge, and then have 20 guys down in there with shovels distributing beans, that sort of stuff. And so spent a lot of time doing that with people. And then that's kind of really where I started learning, getting my Spanish, taking a lot of notes, practicing, not being fearful of trying. Of course, in Brazil, it's Portuguese, quite a bit different. But it is similar enough that I got pretty decent in Portuguese as well. My first time in Brazil, it was pretty wild. I got in there probably 8 o'clock at night, and they're still working. I got into that Cinco Bacia's office, and they're like, you want to eat? I'm like, yeah, I'm hungry. And they go, pizza. I said, yeah, pizza. What kind do you want? I said, a normal. And so they ordered a pizza. It came in. It was a white sauce pizza with green peas and ham. I ate it, but I never ordered one again. So you get all those kind of experiences, and then at nighttime, I remember, the first time I was up there at nighttime in Williams Dock, I think it was, that was up in Bolivia, loading a tank barge, and luckily I had a flashlight, and it's nighttime, and I got on the barge, and they kept saying to me, be careful, be careful. I'm like, okay, whatever, I got it, and I had lifetime. So I walk out on the tank barge and I get to the other side, and I just shine my light just like this, and I started seeing red eyes, and I'm looking out, and there's like, there must have been 20 or 30. They got little crocodiles up there. They're not like the gators we got, but they're crocodiles, and they were just everywhere. And I had no idea. I started watching my my safety a lot more after I saw that. So that was pretty cool. Got arrested for disrespecting the flag of Bolivia by the Army of Bolivia once. Yeah, that was interesting. I went and got a captain, Gerald McDonald, as a matter of fact, and we're in a Jeep. I always rented a Jeep up there because you never knew what kind of terrain you were going to be in. And we went through the crossing from Bolivia to Brazil and back 100 times. They didn't check your passports after the first time. They knew you. It's a little military base, and so the guys were always out there in shorts, boots, and with machetes. That's how they, kept things trimmed up on all the weeds and whatnot. They was working, and we're going through one day, and they're all dressed up, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on here, but let's just take it easy. And so the same guy was there, and we pulled up, and he waved just like normal. And I eased through this little shack area, and they had a road bump set up. And then right after I got through, I heard a whistle blow. I looked in the rearview mirror, and he was standing there with both hands kind of sticking out like nobody could come towards him, traffic-wise. And I just kept going, maybe 5 miles an hour. We were not doing anything. And the whistle start blowing and people yelling. All of a sudden we're surrounded with everybody got guns surrounding our car. And Gerald and I are pretty scared. And, so they drug us out forcefully and took us into their holding area, which was iron bars, no glass. There wasn't a glass in any of the buildings. Bare light bulbs hanging down off the ceilings. So we went in there and we got interrogated, and they didn't really rough you up, but just it was a lot of yelling and screaming. Why you guys here? And my Spanish was getting decent by that time, and Gerald, who was he was a pretty tough guy. He was a good guy from Alabama. I mean, he was pretty fearful, but then he'd make little snide remarks every now and then, try to get me to laugh in front of these guys. I'm like, Gerald, shut up, man. And so we went through quite a few hours, and finally I kind of got a little upset, and I told the guy, I said, I want to talk to your boss. He goes, I am the boss. And the guy didn't. I said, no, you don't have any stripes. You're not the boss. And so we went out to our Jeep, got in, and he sat next to me with a gun basically pointing at me the whole time. And we drove back into Bolivia, out into the woods. Now, remember, we didn't know it at the time, but it's National Flag Day. And so we drove out into the woods, and now the sun's going down, and it's kind of getting dark, and it's pretty deep jungle. And, when we start pulling up, we start seeing there was a bonfire out in the woods, or the jungle, I should say, bonfire out there. And you could see guys that looked like they were drinking, and many of them had, rifles strapped on their, no shirts, rifles strapped on their shoulders. And so I stopped probably 50 yards, 75 yards from them. And the guy's like, let's go. And I said, I am not going any closer, man. If you're going to shoot us, you're going to shoot us right here, because I'd already told Gerald, I said, I think we could take him. And so I parked crossways in the road, and I said, I'm not going any farther. And so he threatened to shoot us, and he didn't. And so he took off, and he went down and got the boss. This big, gnarly-looking Bolivian stood up. You could tell he was out of shape, and he's grumpy, and he comes walking towards us. And then Gerald starts in with his, his music from the banjo music, right? He starts singing some of that, and I'm just like, Gerald, shut up. And the guy gets in, and he was screaming and yelling. We go back again to the same place. This whole ordeal took like 6 hours, I guess. And then basically it turned out to be a shakedown, And but while that guy had walked out towards the bonfire, I told Gerald, I said, get spread your money out in this car. So we took our money and we stashed it in different places. And we got back in there and yelled, and got yelled at a lot. And finally I'm like, how much is it going to take? Come on. We work with Cargill and all these different Williams and. So, he took my wallet, and I left $100 bill in there, and he took it, and we left after 6 hours. And there's some other parts of that I probably don't want to say on the podcast, but it was quite the experience. And so we get back in our Jeep, and we started heading out, and we crossed the same little place again, right? And then we cross into Brazil, and then the Brazilian police pull us over. And Gerald's like, Jeff, I bet they stuffed drugs in the Jeep when we weren't looking. And we were just praying. And so they had dogs. And so they searched us with dogs, and they let us go. We were clean, and it was all good. So, but Gerald and I, we talked about that story 1,000 times since it happened. That was one of our pretty crazy moments in time there. So, and then what else? So again, going back to training and competency and those sort of things. So we focused on that a lot, trying to help get the North Americans out of there as fast as we could. So we did a lot of competency assessments. I'd go on board sometime and watch them. I'd also get some of those guys off the big boats and put them in the fleet boat with me. And let them in the fleet boat. Of course, I was doing stuff like turn off steering pumps, or I'd set them up to fail just to see if they could think. And most of them could. So we had some really good times. Eventually, Dell wanted me to let the Argentine start running the dry dock, and they still weren't ready. And so he talked me into it. We had one of our 3300s coming on dry dock. And so I stayed up in the office, which was about a half an hour drive away. And sure enough, the captain called me and he goes, "Jeff, I'm halfway on this dry dock. We broke loose and we're floating down the river." And so now I got a big boat on the dry dock and the whole thing's floating down the Paranal River. And so luckily we had one of our big boats there, and I called down there, got the engineer fired up, and we went down and finally found it. It was crossways on the point of an island, basically, and we were able to save it, no damage. But it was also a pretty scary moment for us, and then we had some guys that came down and helped training, and finally got them to where they could do all that stuff on their own. So the Argentines in general are very intelligent, good people, hard workers. A couple of guys that work for me in the office there. One's now general manager at Dreyfus down there, big company. And another one started his own business, kind of a cross between economy boat store and a crewing service. They're both doing extremely well. I still stay in touch with them. In fact, one of them's coming in for the International Workboat Show. Andres Pavani, he's coming in. We're going to spend some time together. And then throughout that, I met the love of my life, and Lily Lagos at the time. She was our corporate attorney. She also did immigrations and procurement. I spent a lot of time with her because when we first got there, sending mooring lines and shackling pins and rigging and stuff, right? Rope, soap, and dope, was a big deal because you got to put it in containers and you got to pay transportation, you got to pay taxes when you get there, everything, So her and I, we spent a lot of time together, going around to different vendors, taking samples. I mean, just little things like the little piece of wood you use, shingle, right? To if you get a hole in the bars, you go down there and put one in. We couldn't find that, and so that we ended up spending a lot of time doing all those sort of things, and eventually, after I moved back, she came here and been married and doing well. I moved back, and I went there in I think July of 90, 90 95 maybe, and then left in April of 99. And so just a wonderful time. Was able to travel Argentina to get down to see where they have the national what's it called, where they do all the adventures. They shoot all these different adventures. I got to go down to where they shoot, where the orcas come in and snatch the seals and off the beach and all that. Spent some time down there. Got down into Bariloche. Did a horseback ride in the mountains. Went over to see Aconcagua, which is one of the highest peaks on this side of the world. So I got to travel a lot as well. I took time and did some traveling and seeing everything. So just a incredible experience, man.
It sounds like it. Where did your career take you next?
So they offered me 3 places: Jeffersonville, Indiana, St. Louis, or New Orleans. So I came into New Orleans. Came back here as office manager, operations manager here with Gordon Jackson. God rest his soul. He passed away as well. Wonderful man, and stayed there for about 3 years, and then realized. And now remember, my management started at Harris Casino for a little bit, which was just lots of money and fun. Then I went to Argentina, mostly operations, and then I came here, and then now I'm back into corporate America type office stuff, and I wasn't didn't feel like I was really fit for that office anyway. And so Pat Smith with Coastal Towing talked me into coming over and joining him. He wanted to train me up to be his VP of operations. And so it was a tough decision, but I ended up taking it. And then 3 months later, Kirby bought him out, and we all went to the street. And so I said, heck with it, I'm going back on the boats. And so I went to work for a canal barge. I started running the Merrick Jones, 6,000 horsepower. Well, I was in heaven. In the meantime, I married my wife, right? So she's up here, and she's working. She's an attorney, but she started working for an international company called Latrim. Well, you're from here. You probably know Latrim, huh? The seafood manufacturer. Yeah. So she was handling international business for them, and so she's like, "Well, you know, if you're going to be on the boat. I need a kid." I'm like, all right. I wasn't really thinking about it, so we only made a baby. So 8 months pregnant, she said, "Well, you know, I want to have a baby, you really ought to be home." And so I'm like, "Find me a job," because I was pretty happy where I was at. And so she fixed up a resume, sent it to J. Ray McDermott. If you've never heard of McDermott, you really should check that out. McDermott is a huge, huge company, global organization. And they were in Morgan City, so they interviewed me and they liked me and they hired me. So all of a sudden, I'm doing subsea construction offshore, anywhere from 200 feet to 6,000 feet, and I'm the manager for HSEQ and didn't know a lot about what I was doing really, but they liked me because I was a captain and good experience, international experience, and so started handling all that. On the quality on that, it's a little bit bigger deal because you got welding, you've got you're making big things that have to set on the ocean floor, and so I went to work for them, and then that's where we traveled. We traveled to Singapore, to Indonesia, Dubai, and England, and you know, fair amount in Mexico, and we traveled around quite a bit. And then that's where I first got my good taste of real policy and procedure and good organization. We spent 10 days locked down in a hotel in Batam, Indonesia. We had our Australian team, our British team, or the local team, the team out of Dubai, uh, North America, Mexico. We had everybody there, and to bring all the procedures in and make a global set of procedures. And it's just an incredible experience from an organizational perspective. And so that went really well. And then I started taking over the ISM, International Safety Management, which is what you guys have subchapter M now. And so worked for them, and we did quite a bit of work here in the area. And with I was business level bilingual by then, and so we worked quite a bit in the Gulf of Mexico doing work for PMEX. So I'd go down there quite a bit, and I handle the any issues with the senior team from PMEX, which is Mexico's. That's who handles all their oil exportation and drilling and everything. They bought a yard in Veracruz, Mexico, and they flew my wife and I down there to look at it. So they wanted me to run that as a general manager, and we went and looked at it, and just didn't feel good for raising our kid there, and which we're glad now because it's a pretty dangerous place now. So we did that for great experience. Then when I joined them, they were about 4,000 employees, I guess. This is down in Amelia, Louisiana, and then oil prices changed, lost a few contracts, and then all of a sudden we're down to 400 for 4,000. And so some of the senior guys left, went to a different company called EMOS, and they asked me to go with them, so I did. So we went to Houston. So now we're in Houston, fantastic place to live. And this was a Singaporean company that had bought a Norwegian engineering division out of Houston, and so we're still doing the same stuff, and we did that for a while. Went really well. We're working with the Chevrons, the BPs. Matter of fact, we had Chevron when I was with McDermott. Just to give you an example of what you do offshore, that we had one drop of paint fall off of a coating on a pipe that was going to be, and a Chevron inspector saw it, shut us down. And at that time, that ship held 335 people, I think. The crane was a 4,200 ton crane, and we were welding together 60-foot lengths of pipe and welding them vertically, and then pushing them down to in 5,000 feet of water, doing it 60 feet at a time, right? And we're laying miles of this stuff. So at every weld, you got to X-ray it and coat it. One drop goes in the water, they shut us down. And we were charging, I think it was around $650,000 per day for that ship. And they shut it down for a inspection, for an investigation. So that's the kind of stuff we were dealing with out there. So quality and project planning was critical to success out there. So it was a great education on those sort of things. And then, and of course I was mechanically inclined anyway. So, but doing inspections on these big cranes and, SIMOPS planning and heavy lift, critical lift, once you get past 75% of the crane's capacity, which we did for a fair amount of times, you have to do additional things. And so riding in helicopters, doing Hewitt training. Have you ever heard of that? The helicopter underwater, HUET. Write that one down and check it. It's HUET training. It's incredible. They basically have a body of a helicopter in a giant swimming pool, and you get in there and they sink it. You got to practice getting out. And then when you get good, then they flip it upside down for you. Then you got to get out. So it's pretty cool video to watch. So we did that for a while. And then, so again, I could tell 3 hours worth of stories about that, but I won't. But it was just big stuff. And then, so that's when now Jim Fox kind of comes back into the play, because I'm there working that, and Jim Fox calls me and says, "Hey, Jeff, we got a new project down in Colombia, the country of Colombia." He goes, "I need you to come down, take a look at this." He goes, "You're the only one I know can fix this." And so I fly down, and I looked at it. They had a river called the Magdalena River. It's basically the mouth of it empties into the South Caribbean Sea in Colombia, not too far from Venezuela. And so it flows going south. It actually goes upstream going south. And not a very long river, but it's extremely shallow. Shallow as in, there's times when you only got 5.5 foot of water to navigate, right? And if you're lucky, you might get 9 foot. So very shallow. A big company called Trafigura, which owns Impala. Some folks they'll know Impala because they got a facility at Burnside down there. That's a global organization, multi-billion-dollar a year company. Oil traders, and they also operate oil ships. Well, they were starting a $600 million project down there to put boats and barges and build a terminal, and it's all that. So I go down, meet with Jim, take a look at everything, and I'm like, "Jim, it ain't going to work. I don't see how you're going to make money doing this. I just can't see it. The volumes can't be there." And so I left him a bullet point sheet of 16 items. Look, try to do all these 16 items. Do that. It's the only shot you got. So he thanked me, because we've known each other forever. And 364 days later, he called me back. He goes, "Jeff, you got to come back and try this." And I said, "Jim," I said, "I don't want to talk to anybody there." I said, "Where's the head office at?" He said, "Geneva, Switzerland." So about 6 days later, I'm on a first class flight headed to Geneva, Switzerland. And so I go to Geneva, and incredible. It's just this most high tech office I've ever seen, just spectacular. I do 3 days of interviewing before I can talk to the owner, Claude, Frenchman, a little bit of a typical oil trader, a little bit of arrogance, Matter of fact, they fly in Steely Dan each year for his birthday. And so I finally get to meet Claude, and we did all the niceties. We sit down, and he goes, "Well, Jeff, I just want to tell you, I'm very disappointed in my team that we couldn't find that the only one we could find is a North American to do this. And I said, well, I can appreciate that, Claude. I said, there's not too many of us out there. And I said, by the way, my price just doubled. And he looked at me, he just looked at me and he goes, whatever. And he reaches down, he pulls out a piece of paper, sets it on the desk. He goes, have you seen this before? And I said, yep, that's my 16 bullet points I left for Jim Fox a year ago. He goes, well, we didn't do it yet. Can you go do it? He goes, I want to hire you for 1 year. And so we talked about many things. One of the things on that list was to hire a North American company to come in and do quality assurance, competency training. That was one of my bullet points, and he. I went through the whole list, and he agreed to everything. So called my wife that night. We talked about it, and I did. I basically almost tripled what I was thinking about, and went in the next day, and I said, "I'll do it for this price." And he said, "When can you start?" And I was like, "Boy, I wish I would have added more," but it was very good. So I left where I was at and went down because I just love projects. I love building and training people. So went down there and we set up operation, building barges in Croatia, building boats in Holland, building other barges in Argentina. The Croatian barges were basically built like an ocean-going barge, super heavy. Hell, they drew 2.5 foot of water. And like I said, sometimes you only got 5 foot of water, 5.5, 6 foot, very shallow draft boats, extremely wide. And then we also built a dry dock while I was there. But then, so we focused on, we focused on quality, we're focused on procedures, trying to get not that many companies down there, but trying to pull the companies together and try to, build a little bit of an alliance to push back on the Coast Guard and the Corps of Engineers that they have down there. Because it's just a mess, political mess. Very safe place. I know a lot of people think Colombia is very dangerous. We were in Barranquilla, right on the river, very safe. My daughter was 10 years old. We raised my daughter as English as a second language child. So she was already bilingual by the time we got there. She went to a very elite school, did very well. She really enjoyed that. In fact, she's still, this many years later, 10 years later, she's still in contact with several of her friends down there. And so we got a hold of Canal Barge, called a few companies, and Dell was like, I think we can make this happen. And so we talked about it quite a bit. Merritt Lane graciously came down, visited with us, and we made a nice contract, and they came down. And so the first thing I wanted was quality check. So their teams came down, crawled every barge that we had, and we found a lot of issues. Some of the barges from Argentina, for example, had at the bottom of basically those tank barges have 3 big round tanks in them. So on the floor of that tank to the sidewall, there was 6 feet of no welds, and they were certified down there. We use ABS here. People say ABS all the time. There's other societies out there. RENA was one of them, and their local inspector down there had just missed some things. And so thank goodness we did that quality control check. So we were able to get all this stuff fixed and really make sure it was ready to load. We weren't navigating that much at the time because the terminal was still being built, the place that we were going to load from, which is crude oil. And so we had plenty of time. And then also the pilot houses, they designed the pilot houses in Holland, kind of like they do in Holland. They have I guess they have 2 people in the pilot house. We have one because you weren't able to actually steer and use a throttle at the same time because they were so far apart. And so this is in Colombia, we did about $30,000 worth of renovations in the pilot houses on each boat, 22 boats, just to get those things right. So quite a bit of work there. And then we pushed the limits on several things. There were some areas they said you can't navigate with more than 6 barges. So I personally went up with 6, and And the way they built tow, you probably couldn't, because they didn't really understand about how important a tight tow is, and double and rigging up and all that sort of stuff. So we made a nice solid 6-piece unit, and I took it up through. There's an area called Benisius that you just couldn't get through, and we made it northbound. It was extremely difficult, but made it through there and showed them that it could be done. And then we had a couple great captains from the U.S. That came down, and they really showed guys what you could do southbound. So we really opened up their eyes on all those sort of things, and so it was a good. And it was kind of cool because Canal Barge, they already had a lot of these competency standards set on their training and the verifications and all that. And I actually hired a guy from Kirby. His name is Jonathan Brown. They had a boat named after Jonathan Brown. He came and he was with me, and so we were able to take Canal's standards, and as Del will tell you, we actually helped improve those, and turned out to be a very nice set of procedures and standards. They put two full-time people in the office who worked with us, and so yeah, we were ready to rock and roll. They just couldn't get the terminal built, and it was a mess. And so I did my year. Then they during that, towards the end of that, they started looking to open up other rivers in different parts of the world, over in Asia, and Burma and a few other places, and they wanted me to go and start building new places and become the global head of marine, and we were done. At that time, my wife actually had her law firm up and running, so she was flying back every 2 weeks to take care of business. And so we said, nah. So we came back, and that's when I kind of went to my first real retirement gig.
How long did that one last?
A couple of years, and I couldn't take it. I like to work, and so you can only play so much golf. I don't garden, and and so I started helping a few companies. Helped a local casino down here. They were having troubles passing ABS, really struggling, and so I started helping them. They had major ground fault issues, cathodic protection issues. So I helped them for several years, and air conditioning issues, air ventilation issues. It was surprising. It was quite a different experience than with my time at Harris Casino, because Harris Casino, they really wanted to ensure a quality guest experience, and this other one, not so much. It was more about the money, and so we butted heads several times. So did that. In the meantime, by then I'd had pretty good connections around the world. I got friends all over the world I still stay in touch with, and so found out somebody was needing something, and found it and helped them sell it, and made some money as a broker, and really never thought about the whole broker thing. And so I kind of worked out kind of cool. So I was like, well, this is kind of easy. So got a hold of one of the local companies. Ocean Marine was the name of the company. Great. The owner's a fantastic guy. I joined him and started doing some of that. And then Heartland Barge called me one day and said, hey, we hear you're doing this. And I go, yeah. And how about joining us? And so said they made me a nice offer. And so I joined Heartland Barge. Heartland Barge is a wonderful organization. I told Brian the other day I called him just to let him know I was doing this out of respect. Didn't want to use the name of his company without his permission, and told him he should really be thinking about this. He's one of the most humble guys I've ever met, though. I'm not sure if he will, but he should. And so I've been doing that, been helping people buy and sell barges and equipment. I've done quite a few international deals, and quite a few local ones. $4.5 million dry dock here or there, a couple $1 million offshore tugs, push boats. And I guess, kind of an end of a career type deal. It fits well because there's not much in a barge or boat that I don't know what it is. And um, so when people call and say they want something, I ask them a few questions, and I know if they really know what they're talking about or not. I even sometimes say, I don't want to disrespect you, but do you have anyone in your organization that has been in the marine industry? They'll say no. I say, okay, you need to get somebody, because it's so that was really a lot of fun. And while I was making a sale, ran into a guy who had another project, and I love projects, and so he was buying some ATBs, articulated tug and barges, and so talked to Brian. I left the company in good grace. I left for about I don't know, 18 months or something. Helped a guy, which is a different industry in the maritime business, which is do you know what I mean by articulated tug and barge?
I've heard of it, but no, not exactly.
Yeah, these are like you know, like 400 feet long, 80 feet wide type barges. It's ones where the tug goes up into the stern, and it kind of it's molded so the tug goes right up inside there. So that's a tug and barge type thing. And the articulation basically is if you got two units and you're in seas doing this, where the tug connects to the barge, you got a pin system that goes out the side. So the tug kind of swivels on that pin. So it'll kind of stay easy while the barge is going up and down. Gives a huge, huge difference for the crews. So, um, so yeah, so just I helped him bring some out, did all the compliance stuff, because compliance is a lot of what I did with McDermott. Learned a lot about that and compliance in Columbia. So I helped him bring those out about 18 months. Great learning a whole different industry again. And then and then I knew it was a short gig, and it was. And then so I just started messing around with a brokerage thing again, and Portland Barge found out I was doing this again, and they called me, so I rejoined them. And so that's kind of where I'm at now. And it's been really interesting, because you get to go meet guys at the shipyards, guys, you go out on boats and do test sea trials on tugboats. And now, which is kind of interesting now, because I go out and I watch these young pilots run boats now, standing there as the old guy and seeing how they run. And it's back to I've told a few of the operations managers, you might want to consider putting some tape on the 50% throttle on the forward and back, like I used to do back in the late 70s, because these guys are just, it's full of head, full of stern, so it's kind of interesting to see that again. But yeah, but that's it. My career's it's been a fun career, and I love the maritime industry and love helping people, and I love seeing people grow and get better at what they do, and then remaining friends and that camaraderie. So yeah, it's been a good ride.
Well, before we wrap up here, I do have a question that I've had written down for probably over an hour now. Backtracking a fair way into your early career, when you said, I believe you took a true paddle wheeler from Morgan City up into the river, and you said all the ship pilot traffic and numbers calling you. Can you tell me about that experience from when you turned into the at the head of pass
Yeah,
and then on up?
yeah, that's a great question. So we hired a pilot, because I didn't have a the license for running intercoastal. Mine was river, right? So we hired a guy, and so we went out the Deepwater Channel in Homa, and he said, we're going to go through this place called Venice Jump, which comes out, I think, around mile 10, down by Venice. And so and it was nighttime. Now, one of the critical errors they made in the design of this pilot house, because it was actually a retractable pilot house on a paddle wheel, but they didn't canter the windows in the pilot house. So these pilot house windows are straight up and down. And the whole purpose of a cantered window is to reflect light, so you can see out the window easy. Because when they're absolutely vertical, light can come in one side and it's going to bounce around inside that pilot house, and you can't see. So we were going through this late at night, and I'd never seen Venice jump, but I went up there and looked at it a little bit, and I went back down, and then so it's low tide, uh, low water. We're rubbing the bottom. The guy gets me up at 3 o'clock in the morning. He's about just getting it good into there. And he's like, I don't know what we're going to do, because this and that. And I go, well, we're going to go full ahead. We can't stop. We got like a 25-mile-an-hour wind on the side. And I'm looking around, and I don't know if you've ever been through there, but there's old headers, literally pipe sticking up out of the water uh, on each side of the navigable channel. And the navigable channel, I'm going to say, is maybe 300 feet wide. That's narrow. So I put deckhands down on the deck on the bow and the stern on each side, and I went full ahead, and we're just plowing through this thing. Luckily, there's no traffic, and we're zooming around these points, and so finally we get into Venice. And again, you can't, when you got in around Venice, around the area, there's all these lights from the city and the industry, and you can't see. And I'm calling traffic, and I'm looking at the radar, and I'm not seeing nothing. So I jump out into the river and I go straight across. My plan was to get all the way across the other side, get out of everybody's way, and I was doing that. I was running all the way across, and I hear Nobra, I forget the number, Nobra something, to that casino boat that's in the river, and I'm like 3/4 of the way over. And when I started, there was nobody around, and I'm going and going and going, and I look at the radar again. And all of a sudden, this ship is like not far from me. I didn't realize how fast they went, and I go, casino boat back, and he says, "What's your intentions?" I said, "My intentions is to get over along this shore and try to stay out of everybody's way. That's my intent." He goes, "Well, we need to do that a little bit faster, will you?" and so, and I hustled over there, and again, the lights were just terrible because we changed the design of those pilot house windows because they weren't canted, and I got over there, and by the time I got over there, a little unbeknownst to me, I mean, they've got to run in certain areas because of their draft, right? So I was basically going all the way over along the shore in the deep water where he was going to come. And by the time I got over and got straightened up in the river, this guy is just all over. He was very close to me on the stern, and we made arrangements. He got around me, and then so I woke that captain up that was downstairs. He went to bed. I woke him up, brought him back up, and I go, "Tell me about these big ships," And then that's when he started explaining it to me, and so we did well after that. But the initial jumping in the river, it was a little hairy there for a minute, because you don't. There's things you don't know. Well, you don't know, you don't know. So yeah, so that was. But we made it all the way up, and it was a great trip. A lot of calls, and there was, we're just sleeping on floors, and we had brought our camping gear basically, and toughed it out. Great camaraderie. I guess there is one other kind of funny story about all that. Just before we departed, when the boat was down in Morgan City, one of the guards, he was telling me, he goes, "Hey, you guys get me some fish, and I'll catch crab, and I'll make you guys some, because we're up the north. We'll make you, some. We'll get some crabs and we'll eat." So we got him some, and the next morning we come in, and sure enough, he had a bunch of blue crab. Well, one of our guys was a deckhand. He was a big boy from Beardstown, Illinois, big time hunter fisherman. He's a big, strong guy. And the guy dumps out these blue crabs. First time we'd ever been around them, right? And we're yelling, "Hey man, grab him by the back. Get him on the back." When he reached down, he got that crab on the back, and that crab reached around behind him and snatched his thumb, right? And he starts crying like a little girl, and he pulls out off his hip, pulls out this knife. It looked like a Crocodile Dundee knife. Lays it down and just whack. But the whole time he was screaming like a little girl. And we told that story 1,000 times. First time understanding about blue crabs. So there was a lot of good times. Yeah, that was navigation wise. That was a bad decision for me to get out there in the river when I didn't know, which just reemphasizes the importance of competency assessments and verifications and all the great things that this industry is doing now to make sure these pilots are really good to go.
Mr. Stevens, thank you very much for joining me this evening. I do appreciate your story. I think it's going to be another good one here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm happy to share it, and just want to say thanks, to my family and everybody I worked with all these years, and all the great people that are out there. And we're just gonna keep doing what we're doing, and I'll watch future episodes of this thing for sure, Tim, because what you're doing is it's really good. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, sir.
Take care.
This has been a production of Where You At Studios, LLC.